Luke, Holst of Calibrated Agronomy. I'm from over in the Illinois location, and been working with these guys all year. And I do a lot of the data and trying to help make sense of all this stuff we collect. I mean, we all know it can be confusing, but there's a lot. I think there's a lot of valuable insight we can get out of it. And these guys have done a great job. I mean, we have built a really good data set between NutraDrip and Calibrated Agronomy on how our water that we use in irrigation affects the mineral balance and available nutrition in the soil, and how to interpret that, and then the SAP test. So our approach, like Tim touched on a little bit, is, with the rapid soil test, that gives us a look at what is available in the water soil solution when either it rains or we irrigate, or if we treat our irrigation water. So we've kind of custom to Calibrated and NutraDrip. We've kind of developed our own method with using the rapid soil test, so we can give guys an idea before we go to the field, how hard it's going to be well, first of all, what effect is their irrigation water having, and what's some of the antagonisms and issues and things that we're going to want to try to fix. And then we can, with that, work with treatments and get a look at what treatments we can apply and how they may affect the soil water mineral solution before we spend money and go apply it, and dial in the rates, learn our ins and outs of like, where's our no-go zones on pH if we have water that's easy to change, or separate out what's a decent water we got a good chance of amending and having success with, and ones that need more work. So I'm going to bring you through today some of the higher level analysis. I've ran some analysis with this data on what we're seeing and how we can move forward. So just for starters, this is like how we like to start with guys. So we take a water sample and a soil sample, and I'll take those water samples in, and I'll use like a base treatment, like an acid treatment, and I'll build these titration curves so we know how hard or easy they're going to be. Just to start with, simply drop the pH to amend it, because as we drop the pH, we can burn bicarbs out and things like that. And then we build this table with, in order to reach a target pH, how much is it going to cost me per, quarter acre inch, half acre inch, acre foot? So then we can kind of get an idea on how economical is it going to be to attack this problem. So just these two little quick examples this is a water from Illinois that has a very sharp, drastic drop off in pH. It doesn't change, and then it just changes. That's more of a gentle curve, and it drops off. And all these are different. In order to get started, we just need to have that understanding. And then with this method, we can test multiple products, not necessarily just these acids. I mean, we're working with guys. It was kind of a request that we hadn't really thought. I was like, well, what's the best nitrogen source? Like UAN. What does UAN do when we fertigate 10, 15 gallon the acre? In, say, we're going to go through some today, you're going to see there's, phosphorus is one of our common issues that we have trouble keeping in the soil water solution, like Tim mentioned. Is like, well, what happens when you use UAN versus like a urea-based nitrogen or a urea sulfuric base? That's all kind of some of the stuff we're looking for. So one of the things I've done here, I mean, because I know it's confused me, and it seems like everywhere we go, like every time you think you're learning something, there's another thing pops up. It's like, I don't feel like I know anything now. So try to get a handle on that. And that's why having these large data sets is what we're working on collecting. And it's just going to get better as we go through the years. Is first, let's look at the water quality. So I sit here, I've got this big data set, all these water tests. And what's our water quality? And how do we even measure that? There's a lot of everybody's got a little bit different ideas. So here's just a few things I came up with, that are, some of these are standard. And then I built kind of a multi-dimensional metric that we're going to keep working through. I think it's going to be pretty handy. So our SAR, calculated soil absorption ratio, because what I'm finding is that there's a few things that'll make a water like ugly when we talk about ugly water. So, and a lot of it's tied to sodium, it seems like. So our soil absorption ratio, that's a measurement. I think guys have been irrigating, we all kind of are aware of that. Okay, so then I started using this RSC. This is the residual sodium carbonate. Because as I go through this data, I think what you're going to see, and one of the things that we're finding is challenging, is when we get into really poor quality water, and we will drop the pH or we try to amend the water, sometimes we release sodium or things that they're kind of hidden antagonisms. And so we just need to be aware of that. So that is a measure of, and I say, I put the risk factor for precipitation of sodium, calcium, magnesium. I found it ties really well to what is tied to like a bicarb. Because bicarb, there's calcium bicarbonate, magnesium bicarbonate, sodium bicarbonate. What is tied to that? And then when we're releasing, what's a potential benefit or antagonism we may see as we amend the water? It's such things we need to keep in mind. So then kind of built this, what I'm calling the water risk factor. So it's a multi-dimensional risk scale. So it's got 6 ingredients, things I can calculate, things I can put in and weight them. So we got our sodium absorption ratio, our residual sodium carbonate number, salinity, that uses a combination of sodium and the chloride level and the total dissolved solids, the total dissolved solids, pH, and then our sulfate load. And when we put all these together, it gives us a real good picture of what is the water quality before we even go any further. Like, for instance, one thing I've kind of found is that total dissolved solids, when you look at it on a test now, when we get into like when Kurt was talking, you guys are working with doing manure water blends, and so we bring some antagonism along with that. But a lot of times our total dissolved solids will really skyrocket, but we find that they tend to be easy to work with. We can do things to complex or adjust, but then we'll run into some of these waters that we get into where we call them the ugly waters, that they have just high total dissolved solids, they have high mineral loads, which affects how effective we are at treating. We put all this together, and this is what I've been able to come up with within our data set here. I mean, we have over 700 rows. I mean, we've got over 100 just individual water sites we looked at this year. And this is what we lay out. So in general, we have a lot of decent waters. As we go up the scale, 20 to 30, those are, we're getting ones where you're going to see, look at the test and be like, I don't like the way that some bicarbs are getting higher. I don't like the way that those dissolved solids starts. And then we've got a handful that are moderate risk. These first two groups here, we're finding it's becoming clear that we can work with these a lot. And then there's a lot of things we can do. We can make them better. We can be effective. Once we get into the high risk and severe is where we start to run into challenge. And we got to rethink our strategy on what we do. And so like the good moderate, we can spoon feed and do small rates of amendments and we'll get a response out of those. Once we get into high risk and severe, we got to look at other strategies than just like say amending and working on the water. We need to work on that, but we need to be, that's where things like using biology or using, soil amendments, pounds of the ground of gypsum, other remediation. In general, that's what we can tell with this. That's kind of our NutraDrip network. That's kind of what I've come up with is kind of our water risk spread across everybody that's submitted samples and worked with us. This is the distribution. So I'm going to show a lot of these distribution charts. So up the vertical axis there, that's the count. That's the number of samples in that grouping. And at the bottom, like this is pH. So you can see of all of these samples we pulled, our pH range is pretty tight from all different states. We got a couple outliers, but between 7 and 8. So pH doesn't really give us a full picture of what we're looking at. That's where we got to dig in deeper to the water quality. And then here's some where we start to get noisy. Here's the variance come in. So our sulfur, our sodium, those two sodium metrics in the sodium carbonate risk. As you see, like sulfur, we have a lot of places where it's a normal kind of sulfur load. But then we get into places where, you know, we're carrying 1,000, 1,200, 1,500 parts per million of sulfur. And then like with our risk factor on sodium, it's like generally we got a grouping around 0, it's okay. But then we got outliers, and we go outliers both ways. And then on sodium, same thing. Generally, a lot of those good waters are in this tighter range. And then we get up in our scalar, 1,000 parts per million. That's our worst one. That's 4,000 parts per million of sodium in the irrigation water we're trying to use. That particular site, I almost just consider it brackish. It's sodium, just loaded with sodium and chloride. So you got to identify these risk factors first, and then we can do that. And so then I kind of look at it as like, well, what is driving? When I say I have a poor water quality score, what's driving that? And I can run the math and do this. And so weighting to my risk factor turns out salinity and sulfur load and the SAR number, they drive our water quality score down. As you see, pH third in line out of the fourth. So it matters, but these other things matter more. We need to keep a handle on that. We can do that now. So, and as we increase our water risk, that's when we start to have trouble, with amendments. And then I like to think of it as once we get into these really poor quality waters, let's use the term remediation versus amending. And we've seen this in a lot of the data where we've had poor quality water that's been going on the soil over and over and over again. We're building up. Jared always liked to say, what your water is, your soil becomes, and it is. So we're in these poor water quality places. I mean, we're seeing a sodium loads build up in the soil. So once we get into those situations, it's now we got to think of remediation. How do we correct this problem? Because we can interdict for so long until we've built up the problem. Then we need to remediate. So we got to go into the whole approach thinking like that. Clicker. Yeah. So my key takeaway is pH alone. It matters, but it doesn't drive everything. We got to look at those other antagonisms. In the wells, if we can identify a well with a decent to moderate water quality, those seem to respond very well to small treatments. And then as the water quality goes down, that's when we need to deploy other strategies. And these are just a list of a few we can look at. Like Backbone was one of the Calibrated Agronomy's products. It's a carbon product. Fulvic acids. We've found we can use those help sequester sodium, for instance. So maybe we're using some acidification amendments, but maybe we would need to spend more money on a carbon product because of that. Sometimes we'll get into situations where we need to amend the water, but also need to use just pounds of the ground, work on soil remediation with things like Pelline, gypsum, calcium sulfate, some of these other products here, so we can get calcium up there to say alpha. And then one of the big takeaways is if we do identify these low water quality sites, immediately we need to just think about when we do amend using more higher rates, because we can't seem to move the needle with those poor water qualities when we run these rapid soils, and we actually run a rapid soil test with amended water so we can see how we change our mineral balance. And then this is also another spot, because our Illinois location is, originally we were bioag management, me and Clint, the owners there, our big focus in biology. We've developed our own biological products and stuff. And that's where, the biological world, there's ones out there. You can start to use these and think about those when you get in these, because just for instance, our bioag E product, we have spent thousands and thousands of dollars RNA sequencing, and we know what's in it. There's a lot of species in there that say help with salinity, organisms that can actually consume and process, sodium chloride salts. So, just open mind and think outside the box, and understand the products when we get into these situations. We'll have a lot more success doing that. So within all of this data, we have, not only we do this water quality assessment to start with, and then we titrate it out with a product to see where our economics are and how much we're going to need to use, potentially find our target rate. And then we run this rapid soil test. And so first, you always run the rapid soil test with the deionized water. That is, just our simulation of rainfall. That is just, if it rains today, these are the free minerals in the soil water solution. There's no antagonism. And then we run with our irrigation source. So in order to even get started on this process, we need a water sample and a soil sample. Soil sample needs to come from where the water came from, where that water is going to hit. Because we need to look at the soil balance too. Like one of the things I see in Illinois is when I go to sandy soils with treatments and remediation and stuff like that, I can really move the needle. And I've seen some times where I've completely balanced the anion balance in the soil water solution. But then if I go apply that same treatment to a heavy or black soil in Illinois, I need more to do it. So we can identify those things. So we look at what's the difference between the DI and our irrigated water, and what potential problems are we, what antagonisms are we creating in the soil water solution when we go out and irrigate. And we work with, honestly, a lot of people complain about it. It's trying to figure that out. So here's some kind of ran charts on all of our stuff, and then another distribution charts here on which way do we move with all of our waters. And so in general, so the red line is 0, meaning there's no change between the DI and the irrigation water. When we put that irrigation water on, it doesn't change that nutrient. In general, calcium, and that's good a lot of times. We increase calcium. We carry a lot of calcium in a lot of our waters. About everywhere we go, we do that. Magnesium, on the other hand, kind of goes both ways. So it really is soil dependent and water dependent. So sometimes just putting the irrigation water on actually lowers your free magnesium load. Sometimes it increases it. Sodium in general, and that's, you got to understand the column at the bottom, is ranging from 0 to 5,000. So in general, if we do introduce sodium, we introduce it in a big way. And a lot of times we do. So, I mean, increasing the irrigation water, increasing the free sodium load when we water from 50 parts per million to say 300 parts per million. We see big jumps sometimes. Potassium in general, we go the other way. And so these are the things we want to identify, because now we know, hey, we need to work on potassium. And we've seen this for a long time just in general. Potassium seems to be difficult to deliver. Well, now we pile on top, we're irrigating, and we're out competing free potassium. So we kind of have a game plan almost just using this bigger scale data set. Chloride and sulfate. So in general, carry a lot of chloride in a lot of the irrigation waters. It's a potential antagonism. And sometimes we carry a lot, because this is another scale down here from 0 to 1,000 parts per million is kind of our distribution. So some of these, sometimes we really load up chloride. Sulfur is similar. We usually and generally increase it, and sometimes, and when we do increase it, sometimes they're big change. That actually makes it an issue, because we don't want too much. We need sulfur, but we don't want too much of a good thing. So we go to the anion side, and phosphorus. I think Tim hit on this. We are challenged to keep phos in the soil solution when we use irrigation water pretty much everywhere we go. In general, I mean, we have a few sites where it increases, and sometimes it increases quite a bit, but in general, we are always going the other way. So that's a big focus, and that's one of the reasons, why when we talk about using acids You know, I think here in industry a lot, and everybody talks about an acid irrigation water. Their go-to to just to jump to sulfuric. Well, our data set is kind of establishing that actually we're throwing a lot of sulfur into this system a lot of times, and we're almost always driving phos out. So that's why we start a lot of times with phosphoric acid-based acids when we do acidic water amendments, so we can help try to correct this, amend the water, fix the water, and bring along the nutrients we're antagonizing. And nitrate, kind of like magnesium, it just kind of goes both ways on your water source and your soil, you know, and what you're mineralizing out of the soil and what your water source is. Like an example in Illinois, I see a lot is depending on where you're at, we'll pull free nitrate. You know, everybody talks about that, you know, the nitrate load in the Mississippi River and that. Well, we're pulling a lot of water off the Mississippi River. I mean, we're 20 miles from the Mississippi River, and where we're located at our Illinois location, we're 25 miles from Mississippi. We're 25 miles from the Illinois River. So we see both worlds. And in general, like we'll pull nitrate. In our rapid soil tests, a lot of times we'll crater phosphorus. We have trouble maintaining it in the soil water solution, then we'll gain nitrate. But the conventional knowledge a lot of times is nitrate fertigation, you know, UAN through fertigation. But it doesn't always work that way. And then when we go to other sites, sometimes we actually suppress nitrate. Those insights there, I think, are a couple of the biggest things we found that's a little different than I think what a lot of conventional knowledge is. So yeah, nitrate, magnesium, increased depending on the water source, soil source, sulfur, sodium, calcium, chloride. Those are all our general. When we apply irrigation water, those look out because a lot of times those are going to be going up, and we need to figure out how much they're going up and how much of a problem it's going to be. So, like for instance, you know, chloride. We'll use, you know, use a potassium chloride liquid-based product sometimes, but if we have a chloride issue, we need to switch forms because I don't have enough space before it's a real antagonism. I don't want to add chloride to that situation. Sometimes it doesn't matter if it's economics work out. Hey, that's going to be our easiest, best source of potassium. We don't have this chloride issue. Let's use it because it's cheap. Phosphorus and potassium are usually under pressure, and that's where we're kind of focused our treatment. It's a good spot to start, just in general. Yeah, and then sulfur, chloride, sodium, they have this wide variance. And then we get into these really poor quality waters, and then we'll see some of them go up really large increases in that. So they're pretty tied to water quality, as I think we're finding. So not only, you know, this next step after that is now we look at what does a treatment do? And we've got over 100 of these too. So bring you through, you know, the calcium and the magnesium again. So in general, when we treat with acids, we increase the calcium. So a lot of times we want that, and that's good. And magnesium, we bring it up. But the real important thing I get away from this is these outliers here I've got circled, and they are big changes. Like, because the scale at the bottom is the delta. So that is the ppm that I brought number up or down when I treated the water, and then I applied that to the soil to simulate treated irrigation water going on the soil. You know, 300, 400, 500 part per million increase of calcium, 150 to 200 part per million increases of magnesium. These, when I go dig into this and figure out where those spots are at, those are our poor water qualities. So my working theory is that that's our hidden bicarb. High bicarb load with calcium and magnesium tied to it. And one of the tricky things about doing this is we don't always know what we're going to release. That's why I like that sodium carbonate number, because we're really concerned about if we get in a situation where we say we already have high sodium, we have poor quality water, the soil naturally says then we release a bunch. So, and you'll see this on the sodium again. So sometimes when we treat these waters, we unload a lot of sodium. So just water quality things we learn and that you need to keep aware of. And then sometimes we actually increase potassium quite a bit. But in general, we still have trouble. I mean, with the treatment, moving potassium. What I'm finding is we just need to run higher rates and think about it in your general fertilization strategy is favor like what's some ways I can get potassium in the crop because it's seemed to be pretty easy to antagonize. And we move over to the anions. So in general, see, we're moving the other way on our chloride. This is chloride and this is sulfur. So we kind of can stabilize the sulfur. Sometimes we run in these situations where we just have high levels and we increase them even more and they're just hard to deal with. And like I said, these are our poor water quality spots we're finding. But on the chloride in general, I mean, we have some outliers where it increases, but in general, we're on this side of zero. And a lot of, these moderate quality waters, we can affect that with products and lower those. So on phosphorus and see, on the phosphorus side, we have our change response, our delta, we've completely moved the other way. We can affect this. When we use these amendments, we can bring that up, and we've seen that a lot, and that's what we want to do because we've already established that it's an issue, and our water usually is bringing it down, so we can treat the water and affect that. Nitrate, kind of like before, we increase it with light treatments because a lot of times these treatments have nitrogen in them. So we're just getting straight nitrogen fertilizer out there too. And we can confirm that we've done that we brought it up. And the form kind of matters. And when we get into some soils, it takes more and some it takes less. Like my sand example, if you have a good water quality on like a sandy soil, we can kind of change that mineral balance pretty easily. So calcium's increased. We increased calcium pretty effectively with treatments. Mag's pretty stable. Then we got this poor water quality issue where we'll do some increase, deltas will change, we'll increase these, and we don't really see it until it happens. So that's another reason it's nice to do these bench tests before we're actually out there applying a bunch. We can lower chloride with the treatments, and then potassium, it seems to be harder to move the needle there. One of the things I think is going on is we use backbone in a lot of these, our carbon product, because it's just pretty effective at reducing and sequestering sodium because it's got a pretty good fulvic acid portion. So it's highly negatively charged, basically. So we're kind of organically complexing some of these cations. So I have a feeling that we're a little bit of our potassium issues. The backbone's organically kind of complexing it a little bit, so it doesn't, the test equipment at the lab maybe doesn't pick it up. But in that situation, if we've used like a backbone product, to complex with a carbon, we'll get that back. That's easy to biologically break down. A lot of times we'll use that. That's something we learned from some counterparts we have like out in California, where they run a lot of nut and vegetable crops. And as you go west out there, because it's all snowpack, it'll never rain, it doesn't rain. So as you start at the east side of the San Joaquin, the valley there around Fresno, we work around Fresno area a lot. And then as you move west, that water's got to come out of the mountains. By the time it gets down, it picks up minerals all the way down. By the time you get out close to the Pacific Ocean, you get some pretty poor water. And they use strategies like carbon products backbone because they can't really get it out of there. But so they try to just complex, make it harder, make biology have to work to release it, make it so the plant isn't forced into like having sodium forced at it, because whenever they water, it's just all free and that goes into the root. And then another big takeaway is watch out for this. It's the kind of hidden cation release we keep seeing. I think I think is a point we need to keep kind of studying. Okay, so I'm gonna run through one example here of where we have some weekly data on a guy irrigating with using phos acid based water treatment as part of his his full fertilizer plan. And this is gonna help kind of highlight, I think, what happens this year And what Tim was talking about, and why sometimes this all can be a challenge, because we've had so much rain, in these typical areas where it's drier, we've had the rain, so we haven't had the opportunity to utilize this. So this particular grower, in this water quality here, I would put in that moderate basket, but it's toward the lower end. It's a little bit tougher. It's a tougher water to work with. It really benefits well and needs to be used in these remediation amendment type products. So it's time series starting in late April, moving up to, it's kind of hard to see that, but the end of the first week of August. So our most recent data point is a couple weeks old now at this point. But from the get-go, before the crop's up, he's running and treating the water, and it was dry. This out there. So he had a shot, and he was watering to get everything established. And as the plant goes into mid-vegetative, because this box, what I've got boxed in here is starting there in July, like around July, the rains really turned on for him. So our balance looks pretty good. We've got a high chloride number, but since we're using the amendment, our phos and the chloride, they're pretty even. We've got phos in this is free phos in the soil solution. So it's showing up in the plant, because these are the sap tests. So this is what we successfully got into the plant. What the plant is bringing in from that soil water solution. And our sulfur load, it's a little bit lower, but the red line there is our OL. So this is a decent balance. We've got phos that's usually an issue elevated because the red lines are OL. Sulfur is not incredibly high. This water has a lot of sulfur in it. And we've got some chloride, but I'm not super concerned because our phos is in good shape. Then he has to turn the water off. And then our phos immediately goes down. We start and our chloride goes way up. See the inverse of the chloride in the phos here, because this would be like after he's forced to stop running the treatment, and it's just rain, keeps raining and raining. And this grower's like third year amending. So some of this is probably built up because this pivot's been out there over 20 years. There's always water. Our sulfur gets real wonky. Sulfur's been a real challenge this year to understand. And in our part of Illinois, I think we got to track down to, we had this cool May, and mineralization, we're pretty sure just slowed way down. And so sulfur mineralization slowed way down. And then here's the cations. So same period, there's like, we're pretty good on our calcium. Our mag is right at the OL. We're not overloaded. We've got real good potassium. We like to see this. Our potassium level is good. And he does a good job maintaining this. He focuses on potassium fertilization a lot. But once the rain, once we stop trying to keep the water balanced and we're just forced with rain, and then anything that's going to, our antagonisms kind of come back because they built up in this site. Our mags goes way up. Our K starts to kind of drop down. It gets noisy. And we start on this kind of stair step down. And we kind of recover because there's an acid treatment at the tail end of this. I believe I have to double check it. I'm sure of it. And then this is old and new leaf. So like with calcium, since it's an immobile nutrient, the blue is the new leaf and the red is the old leaf. We actually want to try to keep elevated on sap test the new leaf, because it's immobile. So where it's at in the plant's kind of stuck. So as we're growing vegetatively, if we don't maintain calcium in the new leaf, we consider that a deficiency, because we have a lot in the old leaf, sitting there, because we started off really good, but we're not maintaining the old leaf. So these common kind of imbalances we see in sap kind of start to show up, and we have to stop. But, we start off really good and we look really good, and then once we're forced to stop, we start to come unbalanced. I just threw 3 of the micros up here because I'm going to highlight that in a second. And as Tim kind of held, I think if you look at his sheet there that he's built, micros is a challenge, and it's been specifically a challenge this year. A lot of places, I'm going to run through that at the end on nitrogen assimilation, the issues we saw with that this year. So this is pretty typical. So he starts off early pretty good. Iron, zinc, pretty good. Copper, we just seem to always struggle with. So, but in general, his micros are low, and this is just tracks with what we see about everywhere. And then this is the bottleneck. I'm gonna go through this and show you an example of this rapid growth syndrome we see. So when we start out and we're treating the water in that, now a lot of this is environmental too, because they had cool weather too. But mid-vegetative in here, we start out with a high ammonium load, but see at this mid-July window here, nitrate and ammonium, this is the raw nitrogen. This is not converted to protein. You know, nitrogen, we can't really use it in a lot of the plant processes and, you know, for growth. It needs to be converted to protein. So this is something that's really important. It's good to know. And one of the unique things about SAP testing is you can look at the form of nitrogen. So when we see this, so the red line is like we kind of determine our OLs. If we are above that, we're calling that bottleneck. Like we have unprocessed nitrate and ammonia in the plant. And then you can see it with our total N. So we just stop processing and consume our protein nitrogen. We start out pretty good, but then as we have this spike, we just kind of start falling off. This is classic. We saw this all over the place this year. Nitrogen bottlenecking, poor micronutrition, and then carbon spores are other things. So if we can keep micronutrients elevated, it helps with this process. And as you saw just on our micronutrient slide, we were struggling. You know, we're technically deficient in a lot of those micronutrients. And then when we get this cool weather and cloudy May, like we've had a lot of spots this year, photosynthetic activity goes down as well. So kind of perfect storm to make this happen. This is what we saw in Illinois with it. This is a SAP report. That's in the tool I've kind of built to help me analyze these things. This, I presented at a soil health conference in Illinois, local university this May. You may have heard of this. In Illinois, it was pretty big talk, and it was tassel wrap and rapid growth syndrome. So we had a lot of this, and it's kind of hybrid. I've always called it buggy whipping, but it's the plant. We got a cool, wet May. So where we're monitoring soil moisture, you know, in Illinois, in May, our soil temps bottomed out on the 20th of May at 52 degrees. So we got corn plants this tall, and our soil moisture, you know, temperature just craters down to 52. Well, we all know, you know, from 50 degrees, you know, we still don't have much mineralization. So we kind of were shutting mineralization down, which is where we're going to get a lot of our sulfur and our micronutrients, you know, from that biological activity in the soil, releasing them. And then cloudy days, cool temps, cool soil temps, we don't have the mineral nutrition isn't being supplied. And we, in our area, we had a pretty warm, dry April. So our soil's warmed up. You know, all over nitrogen fertilizer, it's getting active, it's converting. So we got a lot sitting there, you know, that can be brought into the plant, be processed. And then we shut down mineralization. So what we're left with is a plant that's flooded with nitrate. Its response, you know, just natural response is try to store it somewhere, and you get rapid growth syndrome. So, I mean, I think this ties very well together. But look at my test. Basically, just think of this like a gas gauge, you know, red, yellow, green. So look at my micronutrients panel. I mean, there's only, you know, silica, and that's not really a necessary one for nitrogen assimilation. My manganese is high, and my iron's on the edge. My nickel's okay. But all my other micros that are, you know, needed for nitrogen assimilation are just in the tank. And my phosphorus trending low. You know, I'm in this position where I'm not mineralizing phosphorus. It's been about 2-3 weeks we've had this cool conditions. The sulfur is falling off, and look at this. I got good total nitrogen, but look at my nitrate. Look at how far off of where we're going to consider good I am. I'm maxed out, 361 ppms, 151 parts per million. This test is from this field. So these just plants are loaded with raw nitrogen. And we have, we were converting, so our total nitrogen looks good, but as we go through and I trim this out, our total nitrogen starts to collapse because we stopped converting it, so we're consuming what's there. Because we always got to remember sap, when you interpret a sap test versus a leaf test, is a consumptive system. It's showing you what is moving and flowing through the plant, and those minerals, are going to be allocated and used to build different compounds, to build leaves, to build the plant. So that is what the unprocessed nitrogen issue looks like, and that's something that we can be very effective with in drip, because those need to be spoon fed, it seems like. So you can fully apply them, but probably through drip tape is something to always think about. You guys are running drip, is that we can be effective at delivering those. This is another thing we kind of have come up with using all this data this year, is and the importance of sulfur. Now, it's counterintuitive, and I think this is something we need to be aware of. Like, I've been talking about sulfur, and all these waters have got tons of sulfur in them. But this is a good kind of lesson learned on how to interpret the laboratory data on what the plant sees, because we all know sulfur is very important. So why wouldn't these high sulfate waters be, good? Shouldn't we see the sulfate in the plant, skyrocket? We don't on these tests, we do not necessarily know the species of sulfur. So it's not necessarily sulfate that is showing up when we see these. And we need the, sulfate form, really. So sulfur is very important and needs to be part of our fertilization strategy. And we got to navigate around that with the water. So it's a confusing thing. I think we just need to keep in our head and learn. Because this chart here, I ran this on all of our SAP data set. It's a correlation matrix. Basically, it's as I kind of think of it like a yield map. So as our boxes go green, these are nutrients moving in conjunction together. They're going up. So if sulfur is going up, and all the other ones naturally in our test data set are going up with it, they're compatible. They're not antagonists to each other. They're actually, we want to see this. As we go red, that's when they're diverging. So if one's going up, the other's going down. Sulfur correlates to about everything. If we can keep sulfur in the plant and on the SAP test, not necessarily that rapid soil test, we need to see it in the SAP test, then in general, we have a lot better success getting all the other nutrients in. And if you look here, sulfur, important for nitrogen assimilation. Kind of hard to see on the PowerPoint, but the only two nutrients in a SAP panel that diverge from sulfur, they go down. The sulfur goes up, nitrated ammonium, raw nitrogen. Our total nitrogen goes up. Just, it's actually very, very well correlated. Because here is total nitrogen, nitrated ammonium. So just to prove, we need to have that in the plant. And then we also got to navigate around this water quality issue. So it can get a little tricky, but just something to always think of when we're trying to interpret this data. So just a couple other things, I just wanted to share, don't overlook the biology, because for one, that's another story of this year is disease. Coming out here, we're fortunate in Illinois, we got a lot of tar spot. There's some northern, not a whole lot. Gray leaf spot. I just come through from Minnesota. We had meetings up there. They've got southern rust for the first time. I know you guys coming in, I saw some pretty bad fields with rust that are just out dead already. And that's so widespread this year. We were with the grower yesterday. He'd never seen it before. He's in Minnesota. They just don't have it. So it's a fear factor thing. I got a new disease. And so what am I going to do about it? Well, all that harbors on the residue. So as we go into the fall, as we're planning for next year, let's think about that. and that's where you can use like biological products and stuff like that to help interdict, get in the middle of that disease and suppress it on the residue, break the residue down before we go into the next year. This is just actually a trial a dealer, one of our dealers in Illinois did, where they did a case study on using biologicals to break the disease cycle, to break residue down. And so they applied half the field and didn't apply half the field. They go out, this summer, about June-ish, and then they hula hoop test, break up all the residue, put it in buckets, weigh it, and you can convert it. They've been three test sites out on this half and half field. I mean, just in, it'd be 8 months, 6 months, they had effectively got rid of about 1.37 tons of residue in that field. And anytime we can do that, and have that beneficial biology out there and work with keeping beneficial biology, there's all kinds of ways to do it. A fertilization strategy and irrigation is one way because we're not overusing fertility. Then that should help us with our disease next year. And so, another problem we've identified, we see it out there now, is like, well, let's plan for next year. This is just one way we've kind of come up with to kind of help interdict that. So, and I think Tim was talking about, now we kind of establish what we can do through fertigation and managing our water. Now we got to get the plan. And as Tim kind of alluded to, what do you do when you get a year like this? We don't want to just cut our fall upfront fertility down to nothing. Because then if we get this situation like this year where it rains all the time and we just can't, we're like forced to almost irrigate when we shouldn't because we're trying to get, now we got this fertility issue. We need to get this fertility out because we're behind on it. So what we're going to learn, I think our approach is, that is going to make sense for next year is let's just be some common sense things like we know we want to use fertigation more, but we don't want to sacrifice everything. So let's just, use economics, common sense, and pull back maybe our base rate and move those dollars over into what we think we can spend through fertigation. And that's why establishing the baseline is really important because with that, we get our economics, on what it's going to cost so to amend things. So we can kind of don't want to go for broke. We want to have some insurance and manage risk. And farmers just a lot of times it's just about managing risk. So I just for this example, this is not really an irrigation. This is what our kind of dry land approach for our pocket Illinois is going to be with these high phosphate prices. I mean, that's something to think about. We have extremely expensive DAP and MAP going this year. It's just almost uneconomical. And we've already established that even if we have all that out there, these we start irrigating and we're antagonizing it. It seems to always be an issue. We need to address that when we irrigate, but it's expensive to put on. So, and this is just because we know our area of Illinois real good, we know that we have a lot of good phosphorus supplying power in general. And a lot of fields are built up good. So, just how we would change our approach because we're just pulling back, on our DAP, going to an in season, this is about as close as we can get to fertigation. That's wide drop. So the nutrients that we all know we need to focus on, which in our area, we split our nitrogen plant up so we can split shot it, potassium, sulfur, because we always try to keep it in the plant. And we're not, in this instance here, we're not irrigating. So, but we're going to add phos 10-30-40 because we saw a good response this year in wide drop. So we've shaved, $25 off the budget. We feel we're doing a better job. And then because we've established how, important sulfur is and how we had trouble keeping it in the plant, elemental sulfur seems to be cheap, a good cost-effective, cheap way for us to access it. So, I mean, this is just an example of how we use all this to then, okay, now let's make a plan. And that's, as we go forward with looking at treating irrigation water and fertigating, just have to keep this thought process always in our head. So for next year, some things, I want to say to look forward, We need to balance our base fertility to be both defensive against this situation like we have this year where we can't always fertigate, but then also leave some money in the budget so we can work on cleaning up this water, getting it, where it's not antagonizing our free minerals in the water solution. And that starts with identifying how bad is it or how good is it. Don't sacrifice what we need. We know up front. Plus, think of the logistics of it. So, just like in my example, phosphorus, phos is going to be unaffordable. We've established we can get it there different ways. So that's going to be one of the things we're going to work on. That's we're going to cut. That's one of the ways we're going to move the budget around. Always keep availability of nutrient source in mind. That's back to that sulfur thing discussion we've had. What is the actual form I'm putting out there? How effective is it? So for instance, we'll use a potassium chloride, like in fertigation or Y drop and that because it's cheap and we get some pounds. But, we won't ever do that foliar because we know that form is not effective at getting the plant foliar. We go to potassium acetate. So when you see not all fertilizers are made the same. So always keep form in mind. And then understand those risk factors with our irrigation water. We need to establish that and then so we can actually build our plan. We'll never really be able to build an effective plan unless we know our risk factors. And don't overlook biology, how to use it correctly. We've done a lot of work on that. And I know that part of the industry, some people don't believe it at all. Some people, go the other way, and that's the only way you can do it. What we found is, common sense. These products can be effective. We've done a lot of work figuring out how you just need to understand what's in them. And they can be complicated. But that's one of the reasons we're here. I mean, we've had over 10 years of experience using these products. And we know that, we've seen a lot of stuff not work. And we've seen stuff that works. You really had to understand our risk factors in our water. In remediation versus interdiction. Where can we interdict? And then where do we need to remediate? That really, I think, separates is going to be a real big driver of how successful we are doing all this. And then, good, bad, and ugly. We need to identify it. We got to start there. So hopefully didn't make you drink down a fire hose, but that's kind of what I got. And we're continuing to build this data set. By next year, we're going to hopefully have some more tools and more knowledge to build that. But for now, going into the next year, let's think about these things to build our strategy for next year so we can be successful.
All right. Yeah. Thanks a bunch, Luke. We appreciate your partnership and analyzing all the data and seeing what we can do with it. Anybody have any questions for Luke here?
Luke, as we start to think about next year, would it be a good idea to do a rapid soil this fall yet, or should we wait till spring? What would be better?
Yeah, I think that's a good idea. I mean, again, common sense. Let's pull them before we really start to cool off. We want to try to get a snapshot of that active biological mineralization source. I mean, I've got one customer I work with in Illinois. We're having a lot of success with because we have some water that we can really work with. It's easy to work with. And so a blend of 2606 urea sulfuric in their 21954 is doing great things. And he's real happy and he's dialed it in. He's got it down exactly how many gallons he needs to go to this pH. It's very forgiving water. We're just trying to release some minerals and get fertilizer into the system. But, he kind of gives the idea is he wants to do this is he's already pulled some. He's going to pull some right when he starts combining, and then he's going to put it in the fridge and then send it to me. And then we're going to build a little database on his soil. We're going to look at acids. We're going to look at UAN. We're going to look at, our checkmate end product. He wants to look at 1034O. He's got some other. We're going to kind of build a little custom database for him on what moves the needle and balances his soil water. And we're going to do that this winter. And so, if you want, there's still time to learn this. And it's actually, that's a good time to do it is while we're planning for next year. Do you have a question?
So I'd sent a test in on my irrigation water. The chloride came back really high. What is the recommended treatment for that?
We've had pretty good luck with backbone and some of the carbon products. Our backbone product's pretty complex. It's well balanced between fulvic there's a biological gestate carbon in there. It's sometimes I think we just got to try to outcompete it. So what you'll probably see with a situation like that when you go to a rapid soil is it's going to drive your phos out on the rapid soil. So like I showed before, chloride tends to run pretty high, like in a lot of stuff we look at. So it'll drive all the phos out. So we need to increase the phos. It may be difficult to drive that chloride out, but if we can get the phos up where it's back in the solution, then we can move the needle.
I'll validate your answer.
Yeah.
Sap samples came back low on phos.
Did they? Yeah. So, and we can see that in the rapid soil when we do this. We compare that DI to the irrigation water. And that brings up another good point. If you've been watering over and over and you just now identified this, how you can identify if you've got a buildup issue, and we see this with sodium a lot, is either pull the dry corner versus the irrigation. We've done that quite a bit. So the dry corners never got the irrigation water. And then we look at it underneath the pivot. What you'll see is the DI water will show high sodium or show high chloride if you built it up. And your dry corner won't. And then you'll put the irrigation water on the dry corner and bang, your antagonism will pop. And it won't move as much when you put the irrigation water on the soil because we've already built it up. So nuance and things like that is stuff you can see by doing that method.
All right. Anybody else? Okay, Davey.
So you had mentioned some of the sodium consuming microbes.
Mhm.
I was curious, as they're consuming sodium, what comes out the backside of that on those?
That's a great question.
Yeah.
A lot of different compounds.
Okay.
How we tell if a biological product's going to possibly help with that is we can run a test like a biomaker's genomics test on a product. And what that genomics test will do is they can group them by which ones solubilize phos and which ones are good for soil remediation. So it's a known database of these species consume and make sodium, salinity go away. It's been studied. So they give you a score. This product has a higher chance of being able to reduce salinity.
No, thanks. I'd used some of those in the past, and I'd always just wondered what that was. So
that's
thanks.
a good question to look into, but it'd be a lot of different compounds that would be created on the backside of that.
All right. Anything else? Luke, thank you much. Appreciate it.